Maxim, based on DNR standards. The proposed treatment system would basically fit in the second cell. So currently the city has 3 cells, like I mentioned. This is the primary cell, and then 2 secondary cells, which is say cell 2 and cell 3. So after going through kind of just some preliminary site layout, we determined that the best option for just constructability would be to kind of place that new system in cell 2 and repurpose that for the new system. So this is a zoomed in version of that cell 2. So as Lenny mentioned, usually stacker cells are after lagoon cells that have aerators in them. So within that smaller footprint, we would be able to fit 2 lagoon cells that would have aeration, that would be sized to meet your max wet weather flows based on the new on the data. And then you can't really see it, but those 2 blank rectangles on that side would be the 2 stacker cells. So like as Lenny mentioned, Stagger's new design basically reduced their footprint of those rock beds, essentially. And then in the center of those, a little bit close to the south, that's where the blower building would be, and that would also house the UV system, and then eventually connect to the existing gravity line that discharges to Prairie Creek. And with that, I think we will move forward with the previously asked questions as Larry mentioned.
Does this one work? Okay. All right. Yeah, so looking at a few of the questions that have come in previously, we talked a little bit on how we had looked at the land application side of things, and knowing that the lagoons that exist now are pretty good size. So the question came up of, are they adequately sized to be able to do land application? The difference there is I mentioned that the controlled discharge lagoons have to be designed to hold 180 days of flow. So you discharge twice a year. If you're looking at land application, you've got to have in that range of 210 to 215 days. Louder, thank you. 210 to 215 days. So you need a much longer time frame to get through those frozen seasons, to account for rainy days when you can't do land application, all of those pieces. So is that lagoon sized for that? It's bigger than what would be needed for 180 days, but it's not big enough to be a 210 and 215 days storage capacity. And then bring into the fact of additional land for land application and things like that. So it is not intended to be sized for or adequately sized for land application to be a good viable option without adding some additional storage capacity to that.
One of the other questions that we've received is the system that Dow City is currently going through permitting at this time. I'm very familiar with that project. I'm actually the engineer on that project, partnering with the University of Iowa, Professor Craig Just over there. That system is intended for smaller communities. It hasn't been permitted. We're still working through some of the hoops that you have to jump over and hurdles that you have to jump over when you're going through that process. The latest news with that one is one of the things that they're going to hold you to is the average wet weather flow. So in Dow City, for instance, they have two cell controlled discharge lagoon. They have an ammonia compliance schedule, and we happen to be able to partner with the University of Iowa, and then BES is the one who's provide the vendor for the system that they're doing there. It's a Fluence M2 Plus system. What it is it's a 40-foot shipping container. It has it has 2 aeration cells in that shipping container that has a membrane in there, and that membrane's there to be able to grow the bacteria on that you're doing it. And then it has a clarifier in there, along with some sludge processing in there. And then what we're doing with that one is, the plan is to install a septic tank up front that also acts as EQ to be able to normalize the flow before you send it to the shipping container. That shipping container only has a flow capacity of 30,000 gallons per day. Dow City's average annual flow is 22,000 gallons per day, so that's why we were trying to go with one shipping container there. Unfortunately, the DNR, or their average wet weather flow is 45,000 gallons per day. They have a splash pad in town, and that's the biggest contributor to why they've gotten up to 45,000. So we're actually looking at some different alternatives to bring it back under 30,000. But the DNR has outlined that they will not let you design your treatment system less than the average wet weather flow. We did a waiver petition to the DNR, and that was still their stance on that. So in order to meet that average wet weather flow of 45,000, they'd have to add another shipping container to it, which at the time when they got that shipping container, the cost of the shipping container itself was 250,000 gallons per day, or $250,000. Now, the latest estimate I've gotten for one of those shipping containers is $450,000. And with it being 30,000 gallons per day, and your average wet weather flow of 270,000 gallons a day, you'd need roughly 9 of them. You could go with a different option from the M2 Plus to where instead of having a clarifier, they'd have an MBR, which is a membrane bioreactor. That's a little more efficient, also a little more complicated to operate, and there's going to be more maintenance associated with it. That would raise the amount or the flow capacity to 50,000 gallons per day, and that container is roughly 150% more than the other container. So you get down to about 5, but at the same time, you're still talking quite a bit of cost in just getting the containers over here, and then you have to put them in a building, plumb them all together, and when you start talking that many containers and trying to plumb it all together and operate them in parallel or series, it gets awfully complicated. And it's more of an activated sludge plant, which would require more operational support for it. So that is the biggest reason. That's meant for really small systems, less than 100,000 gallons per day or less is really what that one is intended for. And then we're hoping that we can get the DNR on board to be able to only put one container and use the lagoons as equalization, because we have all that storage already available. We're trying to utilize the existing infrastructure as much as we possibly can. So with that system, it is something that we did look at, but just with the complexity and the number of containers you were going to have, it was going to be as costly or even more when you got all said and done getting it all put together, and then it was going to be a lot more operations and maintenance associated with that system than the current design out there.
All right, now I'm going to jump to what can we do with the one that we've got. Okay, so can we replace the valves in the existing system and operate it a little bit differently? Okay, what does that mean? That goes back to what I said earlier about a properly operated, maintained, designed, controlled discharge lagoon can meet water quality standards, can meet effluent limits. Okay, one of those components is maintaining everything that's there, maintaining the valves that allow water to be moved around in different locations, being able to direct flow different ways, being able to draw water off of different levels during that discharge period. Okay, so that's one of the things that historically goes in a lot of controlled discharge lagoons is those valves don't get turned very often. Sometimes they don't get turned after the day that they get put in. If you don't turn it, don't maintain it, those things seize up, they lock up, and you lose that flexibility. So sometimes that becomes a scenario where if we can't control how the water moves around or where we discharge it, then we limit that ability for it to do as much as it possibly can. Right? So we're in a situation now where not all of the valves work out at the lagoon site. So that gives us a little bit of a challenge of, can we isolate that primary cell during discharge so we're not pulling fresh wastewater in as we discharge? Can we discharge off of different levels? Those are challenges that are faced right now. If those valves are replaced, it optimizes what's there. It gives it a shot to do better. Does it allow for consistent compliance during all scenarios for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? It's to be determined. We don't know the answer to that unless we would do that and we would operate it that way. And it gives it a chance to operate it as best as it can, but it doesn't give it the flexibility to be consistently in compliance and under control. It doesn't give the ability to grow or to expand. It limits that ability, it keeps with what we have, but it makes that a real challenge to know what does that look like moving forward, right? That's not the way it's been. We've got the data for the way it's been. I was telling the mayor, I'm teaching a class on Monday how to properly operate lagoons, so that the systems that have them can give it the best shot that they have. But that doesn't mean that they can do miracles, right? They're not designed to do what they're being asked to do in all places. So that's one of those of, depending on what's coming in during any given 6-month period, depending what the weather was during that 6-month period, what are all the conditions that we don't have control over? We can control some pieces on when we discharge or how we discharge it, but we can't control all the other variables. So to answer the question of, is that enough to comply with what it's being asked to do now, is almost an impossible thing to state from a perspective of will it do that consistently in the future, because we don't have the ability to control all those variables.
Alright, sorry about that. The next question was, can we keep our sump pumps connected to the sanitary system to dilute the water in the limits? First off, that's mostly going to be determined by your city code, but from an engineering perspective, you would have to basically make sure that your sanitary sewer lines are properly sized to receive that flow, so that you don't surcharge and then back up flow into basements. You would have to possibly oversize your lift station to kind of be able to meet all that varying flow, whether when there's no groundwater or rainwater that you receive that would go into the sanitary service system. And then you could potentially have to resize your lagoon systems to receive all that flow. But all of that would be very variable, right? Based on your groundwater levels, your rainwater. And the current trend that we're seeing right now is cities disconnecting, basically going from combined sewer system. So that's when they have storm water and sanitary together, going to a separate system. So from that perspective, again, it'll be up to your code, but from an engineering perspective, we wouldn't recommend that.
All right, so can the city apply for a disadvantaged community? Yeah, let's talk about what that actually is and what that means, right? So as the DNR was doing some new stream evaluations, limits were getting tighter for a lot of communities. The state legislature actually said, halt, you're asking too much. Communities can't afford this. So they put a requirement into place for the state to look at setting criteria to determine what is unaffordable. Okay, so these projects get pretty expensive pretty fast, and there's a finite amount of people paying finite amount of money into funds. What dictates what's unaffordable? And that is where they came out with the disadvantaged community rules, disadvantaged community process, as an opportunity to look at, if we're looking at this project, what would that cause rates to be, and how does that look from an affordability standpoint for the community where that's going to happen? So looking at what's the median household income, what's the poverty rate, what are a lot of the socioeconomic conditions, not only of the community, but the county and the state as a whole. So looking at the county and the community as compared to where the state's at, and comparing those, and depending on that ranking system and how you score in that scenario, it determines whether you are considered disadvantaged or not. That does not in any way mean that you don't have to do a project or that you don't have to comply with the standards that are set in the permit. What that means is your schedule changes. So instead of saying, we've designed this system, it costs X dollars, that's not affordable, what are we gonna do? It is, let's look at other alternatives. Are there things that can be outside the box? Can we get really creative and come up with something new? Are there new technologies like we talked about with Dow City that are coming down the pike that we might be able to look at? That allows the flexibility to have some time to look outside the box and figure out if there's other alternatives that are available to the city, and gives the gift of time. Okay, so it's essentially setting a new schedule that allows some time to look at some other alternatives and to allow additional time to do things. It doesn't in any way make the requirements go away. It doesn't in any way make a project just disappear. The limits still have to be met. It's just a matter of what's the time frame and what does that schedule look like for availability. So it's not even just an extension of an existing schedule. It's looking beyond that with development of some reports to look outside the box and see if there's ways to become a more affordable project. So we've looked at that for the community in a couple of different scenarios, and the way things have run out, the city would not be considered disadvantaged, so that's not really an option based on what has come into play to date. It doesn't mean that there won't be things that change in that or changes in scope of things that might get you there, but the initial run of those numbers don't qualify for it. But that doesn't mean there's not options out there, but that just means that schedule in itself hasn't panned out as an opportunity at this point.
Okay, there you go. So the next question was, how will the project be funded? So at the time of the facility plan, what we recommended was for the city to move forward with SRF and CDBG, so the Community Block Development Grant. As we went ahead into design, we updated our cost estimates. We looked at the possibility of the project having BABA compliance, so Buy America, Build America. That usually increases the cost for some materials. So we looked at some of the elements, or some of the design that would require BABA versus if we didn't do BABA compliance. So that will all depend on the funding source. So sometimes SRF, depending if they have like a federal attachment to where they, to the bucket that you get your loan from, then you would have to do BABA compliance. CDBG currently, they require that BABA compliance. So we try to get some of those cost estimates from vendors to kind of compare and see if it was going to be beneficial for the city to move forward with a $500,000 grant. And just based on our estimates, basically the increase in price for the materials that were BABA compliance would basically be greater or equal to that grant. So then, but that comes along with additional work on the city side, on the contractor side, and on the grant administrator. So after consulting with the city council, it was decided that that the city wasn't going to pursue CDBG. That could change. It would just extend the schedule, the design schedule, and the bidding schedule. So currently, the city's plan has received is on the IUP, so the intended use plan. So eligible for that SRF loan, and then currently the IEDA, so the Iowa Economic Development Authority, has another grant called WTFAP, and I apologize, but I don't remember what the acronym stands for. But that basically doesn't come with any strings attached. It's grant money. It's based on the socioeconomic parameters, and then also just kind of what you're doing for the water quality of the stream that you're discharging to, or just if you were doing like a drinking water system, kind of what you were trying to do with treatment. So that one comes around once a year. And the city can apply to it as many times as possible as long as the project is in construction. So we are intending to apply on behalf of the city. The grant administrator would be applying for that grant on behalf of the city as we move into construction. Oh yeah, for that one you are eligible up to that $500,000.
In addition to that, some of the grant money, we can't really say how much grant money the city will get with it, is because you have to be further along with the project to be able to apply for those grants. Like CDBG, if the council decided to go after that grant, change their mind and go after that grant for 500,000. You can't apply for that grant anymore until after you've received a construction permit. So you'd have to have the plans and specs submitted to the DNR and approved prior to submittal of that application. And then the WTFAP grant, that one is also, you gotta be a little closer to being more shovel ready. You can't apply for it at the beginning planning stage. They want you to be closer to design. Typically, they'd like you to have at least your plans and specs submitted to the DNR for approval prior to submitting that application for that one. And then the other piece that we can talk about there is SRF. There is a potential, but they'll run their own analysis if the city qualifies for any forgivable loan. The city and ISG and the grant administrator doesn't have any control over that. That's their own internal analysis that they do, and we have not heard one way or the other yet for that. The next question would be, would using the same technology as the city of Crescent be a lower cost option for the city of West Bend? That's a unique system. I appreciate the person who shared that system. It wasn't one that I was familiar with, but that one is in southwest Iowa, I believe, and they're discharging to the Missouri River. And so one of the things that they have going for them is they're discharging to a larger stream that has higher ammonia limits. They also have an existing controlled discharge lagoon, and what they're doing there is they're retrofitting their system to having EQ and primary settling. Then it's being conveyed through a lift station to an MBBR, which is like the nitrox system. That's just a large tank with media that moves around in there and has air provided to it for ammonia treatment. And then it goes to a clarifier for settling, removal of solids, and then it's going through some form of disinfection and then being ultimately discharged to the stream. It also has a recycle in there to recirculate back the sludge or the biosolids back to the front of the plant. They'll have to waste those solids more frequently. It's almost how do I want to say it? A mix between a continuous aerated lagoon system, like a nitrox system, and an activated sludge plant. So that one will have, but based on the scale alone and the ammonia limits, it's I think estimated at $1.5 to $2 million. Their flows are 3 to 4 times less. Their loadings are 3 to 4 times less, and also in addition to that, their ammonia limits are much higher. So that will actually have an impact on the size of the MBBR reactor, because you're sizing that based on your ammonia loading, your nitrogen loading, and what you're trying to remove down to for your ammonia limits. So that would get much larger. So I would anticipate that just based on the size alone and the stream that it's discharging, that it would be very comparable with the cost as this one. And then when you're adding in recirculation of biosolids and almost operating it as an activated sludge plant, there's going to be more operations and maintenance and oversight needed for that system. It is a neat system. It works really well for the location that they're in, but it's not one that I would deem as applicable to West Bend.
I just wanted to correct something that Lenny said. So for CDBG, they change the requirements very often on when you will determine eligibility. So currently, last year it was that you had to have plans and specs already approved. This year, now it's as long as you've submitted the plans and specs, you're good. But things are a little bit up in the air with CDBG. They've even changed like the dates for submittal. It used to be May 1st, now it's May 22nd. They're not sure how much grant money they're gonna have. So again, that's something that's up in the air, and they always change the rules.
Anybody believe that the government changes the rules, and when they give you free money, it's not always free? Okay, so we keep talking a lot about let's find a bigger river. If we discharge to a bigger river, we would have higher limits. That's why some other systems work where they do. So let's take a look at the option of West Fork discharge. So we've got, all right, so lift station lagoon system sitting here. We looked at a couple different routes, so coming up to the north and over the river, and then heading straight south to the river. A couple different alternatives there, and reasons why we're looking at those routes, because we can follow roadways, you can follow right-of-ways, Haven't dug into the permissions of being able to utilize the right of ways, things like that, but that is typically an easier route than trying to cut cross country across private property, going through potential wetlands and things like that. So those became the initial first cut on locations and where to go. We ran a few numbers. DNR provides the opportunity for you to be able to run your own spreadsheet, calculate your own limits based on what you have for information, to see a rough estimate on where we might be on what we might get for relief if we did that. So we were talking previously of our current discharge limits would give us 1.5 to 2 milligrams per liter of ammonia for a limit. We'd be getting a little bit more than that, maybe in that 3 to 5 range. Okay, so depending on the season when we're discharging. So we get a little bit of relief from the existing discharge. Again, that's still 2.5 million gallons a day that's being discharged. The limits get calculated based on what they call critical low flow. So figure you get 25% of the least amount of water that's ever been in that stream. Okay? So it's not the day when it's running pretty good. It's not even necessarily what it was like a couple years ago when it was running through a drought. Okay? It's a very critical low flow level, so that whenever that receiving stream may be at its lowest, we're still going to protect the aquatic life. We're still going to protect the uses of that. So very little dilution, but there is a little bit, right? That gives us as much of an opportunity as we could get. A little bit of relief there, but then you start to weigh the components of, well, what would that cost? Okay, so that's going to mean if we're going to go that far, we're putting a fair amount of pipe in the ground and we're going to have to pump it. So we're going to be looking at moving that water. Rough numbers on that look like it's probably not a great alternative for that little amount of relief that would come from it. Thinking about what does that allow you for flexibility for the future? Again, all of those other components taken into consideration. How much would that get you for that expenditure? What flexibility would that provide? You're still looking at the operation of that controlled discharge lagoon that gives you a little bit of control to meet what I would say is probably in the realm of the limited technology for that capability. So you're closer, you get a little more relief, but it's still pretty tight on what you would be able to do consistently. So I'm gonna say with that, we've probably talked enough without opening the floor. So I think we're to the point that we're ready to take some questions. Yeah. Oh yes. Yes. One more topic first.
Okay. We talked briefly about sump pumps, and we didn't talk about footing tiles, but the code says that we shouldn't be dumping sump pumps into the sanitary sewer, and the code also says we shouldn't have footing tiles hooked to the sanitary sewer. And if you, when we get those big rainstorms, you see those pumps running around town, I don't think we're actually supposed to be pumping that out of the sanitary. But if it's running in your basement, it's not a good thing either. And I can attest to that. So I would like to have people that have sump pumps, I would encourage them to direct them not into the sanitary sewer, but out in the yard or to the street. And sump pumps are the easy part of this, because you can go down and turn a valve and you can get them to go outside. Footing tile, there's a lot of those in town. I tore down a house behind me, and it was Richard Hounsman's, and that had a footing tile. And I'm thinking that house was built in the 40s or 30s, and it had a footing tile. And I get a lot of yard water, so I know that was taking more water. But the other thing is too, when I tore down that house, and I'm guilty of this, I didn't cap that sewer line at the main, I capped it at the footing. So I got 60 foot of 60-year-old tile. So we need to cap those at the main and in the future, I guess. But We are doing a lot of sewer line work. You see that CIT truck around, they're televising, they're cleaning lines, they're lining lines. And when we line a sewer that's broken or we did a block and a half or so last year. And then we only cut out for the active sewer lines that are connected. So we'll eliminate some of those that have been sitting there dormant or whatever. I mean, there was a house across the street from me that was torn down 40 years ago, and I'm sure that sewer line's laying in the yard, you know, taking on water. When it rains, we get those big rains, them footing tiles put a lot of water in sump pumps. My neighbor put in an outside sump pump, eliminated his footing tile, put a sump pump in. We get those big rains, that 4-inch rain last fall, it ran for 24 hours straight. You know, that's a lot of water. Yeah, and that overloads our system and causes residents a lot of problems. So you probably all got one of these sheets. If you have a sump pump, you don't know how to direct it the right way, get your plumber to come take a look or ask somebody that might know. And if you got a footing tile and you want to do the right thing, spend 10 grand and unhook it.
All right, we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. I'll walk out to you with the mic. We'll go ahead and I guess I'll just have you raise your hands and I'll try and get to you as you go along. So are there any questions I guess I should ask? And if you want, feel free, just raise your hand or let me know and I'll come over to you.
I just had a question about the maintenance of the Sager system. You said with like our lagoon, you know, the valves don't get exercised and when there's problems with them. We've had a problem with ours not keeping up with that stuff. What kind of daily stuff or maintenance does a Sager need?
Yeah, so the Sager system's gonna have valves with it as well to be able to direct flow and to direct air around the system. We're gonna be adding blowers to that system, so it's gonna have belts, filters, oil, things like that for the blower system. But from a perspective of the lagoon, you've got the lagoon similar to what you've got now, other than it's got the air laterals in it. And you've got the Sager beds, which are buried boxes of rock essentially that are there. There's not a lot of maintenance to be able to do with those because it's all subgrade. There will be, we didn't really talk too much about the disinfection side of things, disinfection equipment that goes with that, ultraviolet light. So that's a matter of, it's a bank of ultraviolet light bulbs that would be pulled out, cleaned off, and stored or in the system. So not an excessive amount of maintenance.
Daily, weekly, monthly, like what kind of stuff should?
Yeah, so any wastewater system is going to have a daily requirement to be out there and look at stuff. You're going to be checking the flows, you're going to be making sure the air's still on, you're going to be collecting samples on some frequency, making sure that the system's still operating. From a maintenance perspective, those things are more on a seasonal basis. Usually valve exercising and things like that are going to be on a once or twice a year standpoint. So it's not a daily thing, but every wastewater system is going to have daily operation that has to happen with it.
I guess I'll ask, did that answer the question or?
Yeah, I was more concerned with, we have a problem with our current lagoon with stuff not operating correctly, so if we continue on the same path, like, we're gonna have problems with the Sager.
Every system needs some maintenance, right? Yeah, I think a big piece of that is more in the realm of knowing from the beginning what does it need, and then making sure that that is allocated to be able to be done.
Oh, one other thing is another piece of it is the Sager does provide training, so they'll be on site when it gets started up, and they're actually very good about notifying the operator in the fall, because like I mentioned during the slide with it, they actually have to go out and operate some of the valves to close down a section of the Sager beds and then divert it to the secondary ones, and they'll actually send out reminders to the operators to make sure they're doing that, because I will say when they first got into operation, like the Kingsley one, for instance, it was actually on the DNR's I'll call it the naughty list, because people were forgetting to turn those valves and they weren't being able to meet ammonia limits. And then once they got that figured out, it was fine. It was just more of an operational control thing.
Following his question, what's the electricity use look like that on the daily?
Daily, I can't give you daily. I don't have those. Monthly, yeah, typically, or we have budgeted as part of the cost analysis in the 20-year life cycle of $2,000 a month, but typically they run anywhere from $800 to $1,500, depending on how often the blowers will be running full time. They may have our VFDs on them where we can adjust it so you're not using as much power, and then UV has a play in that, depending on if the UV is being operated or not.
First, you raise your hand first.
Okay, we see there's 2 buildings with the Sager that need to be built on the Sager system. 1 building. Will we need a full-time person to run the Sager system or any more employees for the city?
No, that was intended in mind not to add additional oversight. So it's a pretty simple system to operate, like I mentioned. Seasonal maintenance. Another thing that you'll have to worry about is the mulch over top the Sager beds. You'll have to fill in the mulch a little bit. But ultimately, I mean, that's up to the city. I can't speak for them, but ultimately, you typically don't see added personnel with this type of system.
Yeah, we talk about it's got more flexibility from an operability standpoint and a treatment standpoint, but that does not mean that somebody sits there and plays with it every day. It shouldn't need adjustment on a daily basis. It needs some observation, as does any system, but it doesn't need daily, like somebody babysitting it every day.
My name is Paula too. Do you guys have do you have an estimated?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'll let her go right here.
I guess a couple questions. Talked at 6 to 8 million. Is that the numbers going to throw on? Is that in that
Right now,
in the correct range?
Right now, it's we have the board up there. It's $6.5 million, and that's total cost. So one thing to factor in that is the lift station itself that needs replaced regardless of what you do, and that's $750,000 itself.
And that includes running the 3-phase out.
Yeah. Yep. Correct.
What hasn't been said, you talked about Country Made, you talked about Scoggins. They've never said the dollar amount per customer residential. They're talking anywhere from 110 to 130 added on to your regular rate. Is that in the ballpark of what each customer will pay?
It's too early to say that because we're still working through funding and what grants will be available. That's going to have a big impact on it.
We have to assume no grant.
And
It
that
might happen, but you cannot depend on it.
understood, but we haven't worked through the rate structure of the 2 industries either. So it's hard to say because those are going to have an impact on that individual residential user rates too.
We can guess at least 75 or up to 100 and some, or we can say 50. You know, this is a lot of money.
No, you're correct. You're correct. It's hard to say a number because then you're beholden to that.
But if you're throwing out maybe a $500,000 grant, you've knocked this down to still $6 million.
Yeah, correct.
So to pay that back, every individual's gonna pay at least $100 a month or more.
Potentially, but not necessarily. That's still being determined.
And then the other thing is, you brought up Scoggins, you brought up Country Made. Has anybody met with the school and what it's gonna cost our school?
As far as
Have you met? They're one of the biggest users in town when it comes to water, to sewer. What's this gonna affect what we do to our schools? Have we addressed anything with the school board?
with the school, they'd be under a standard rate, so they'd be usage based. They're not.
I mean, they're probably one of the biggest users in town. They're huge. Sometimes they flush the toilet, they do water. Have you, I know that you've met with the other 2 businesses. Have you met with the school?
Not yet, no, we have not.
That affects us all, because we're all paying those bills.
Correct, no, I understand that.
I was just curious how far this has gone, and then when is this gonna be a finalized deal, or is it final?
Right now, we're in design, but that's the purpose of this meeting is to be able to answer questions with the the constituents. Like was discussed before, this has been an ongoing project for 6+ years.
Well, I understand that. I guess my whole thing, I know it's been going on for 6+ years. Why didn't 6.5 years ago, we do the maintenance out there and we know today if that would work or not?
Good question, good question. A lot of it is.
I know that has not been maintained out there. That's not your fault, that's not the council's fault, it's just.
It is
there are a
what
lot-
it is.
There are a lot of different people.
Yep.
But if this started in 2019, or when you guys first got into it, if you'd said, let's do our maintenance on it right now, bring that up to where it should have been, we'd know today if it was gonna work or not.
Understood. That was a discussion with the council at the time. And
And maybe I'm wrong on that, I
I
guess that's just what I'm wondering, if 6 or 7 years ago, we'd have done the
Ow.
correct maintenance, we would know today whether it worked or not.
correct. Has been previously discussed, it's more of a concern, not with the operations. We've done that at other facilities. With doing the operational changes, doing repairs to the lagoons with similar stringent limits. I think a lot of the focus has been put on what the loadings are. It's really more in association with the ammonia limits. And really what it is we've had other systems that have done that. They've done that, they've operated how you're supposed to, shutting off the primary cell when you're discharging and then kind of operating it in series is the most optimal way. And they did not meet compliance consistently. So that was part of it is being able to evaluate whether or not it's going to meet it consistently, and then also is it scalable? Is it going to be able to project out future with the potential future limits and everything associated with that? And then also in the beginning there was talk about expansion with a couple of the industries, and we also had another industry that was connected to it, but they ultimately decided to disconnect, and they were a significant contributor at that time.
And have all those numbers, like if Country Made does what you're asking them to do, Scoggins do, have you deducted those numbers out of the numbers you're saying it takes? Are you changing your numbers according to them doing what you're asking them to do?
That's what it's based on right now, is what we have outlined
As of today.
As of today, yeah.
Right.
Yep. There has not been a decision based on if they're gonna lower them or not. So it's hard to project forward with that, but essentially what you would be doing in that regard is you would be adjusting your aeration, so you get a little smaller blowers, you get some smaller diffusers. It's not gonna have a huge impact on the cost. It will have a little bit of an impact on the O&M electric usage, but not a significant amount. But really what you're gonna be looking at is reducing your aeration system with the organic loading that you'd be dealing with. And not trying to dismiss that that's not a big deal at all. I'm just saying
I guess I'm one of those that more willing to try and, if we can get by with what we have, push this down the road 2 years and see what new technology might be out there. Engineers are doing a lot of great things with projects like this.
yeah, I'm one that's looking at a lot of them. But ultimately,
That's just some of my questions. I think 2 years from now, we might find out there's a lot cheaper options out there.
potentially, I can't say.
I know
one way or
you
the other.
can't, but.
But the other thing is
Stuff coming up.
that's a decision for the council if they want to hold off or not. So that would be something we would support either way.
Thank you.
Well, so part of my question was the monthly cost for the residents, but also as a small business, is there going to be a different impact or additional cost on a business commercial level as well?
Not anticipated unless you're considered what would be a significant industrial user. So for instance, if one of the two industries that are considered that right now, and they decided to do something at their system and reduce it down to the level that would be considered domestic strength, they would not be considered a significant user and then would be paying the same similar rates just based on usage.
And based on the previous answer with, as far as like our lagoon and maintaining, so we have not made any effort in West Bend to rehabilitate our lagoon. You had said like we've done it in other areas, right? We've done it in West Bend.
Correct.
In West Bend specifically, we have not made any effort.
They've replaced the valves here recently. Yes, correct.
They replaced.
Okay, and then
Two, no, yeah, two.
My other question too is, given that this has been going on for 6.5, 7 years, has the city budgeted to put any money aside to allocate towards this project, knowing that this is going to be a large expense?
Yeah. I'll have to defer to the city on that exact question.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something. The rates are not determined by us. That's whatever the municipal advisor advises. If the city were to want to change the rate structure, that would be up to the city. So that's just one thing to keep in mind.
I just wanted a quick address as a Country Mate, name coming up here several times. Our waste load, we've been working on that, trying to get good data, and it's been a struggle for city and us to figure out what the right waste profile is and what it can be. And so since we've invested almost $100,000 putting in a special metering pit that would sample as